Greetings ladies and gentlemen, Jeremy Adrian here. Welcome back to the channel and to another 10 Reasons Play or Avoid New Player review, and this time it's for BioWare's latest narrative-driven RPG loot shooter, Anthem. The game has been out for almost a week in early access for EA Origin Premier subscribers, and I've been playing it heavily, so I'm here to share my thoughts, the good and bad, before its full launch, to hopefully help other new players answer questions like what's the game all about, what's fun, and is it worth playing. I'll be breaking down the game in 10 key components, the most important aspects of Anthem that you need to know about if you're going to jump in. Let's begin with an important one, and that's the gameplay and combat. In Anthem, players are freelancers who are pilots of javelin suits, which are these incredible technical wonders that you use to explore the world and engage in combat with. There are 4 javelins at launch: the Ranger, the Storm, Colossus, and Interceptor, and each has their strengths and weaknesses, unique weapons and gear, and they're all viable for solo or group play. After the tutorial, you start by unlocking your first javelin of choice, and as you level up your pilot, you'll get to unlock all of them eventually on your way to the level cap of 30. These javelin suits are the main attraction of the game, and it's easy to see a ton of work went into ensuring that they each individually feel good and unique for players. While taking part in missions, strongholds, or free play world exploration, your javelins are key to master, and movement involves flying around, which is awesome, and it does have a heat meter, so be sure to keep your eyes on that, as you'll occasionally need to land or pass through a waterfall to cool off so that you can stay airborne longer. Javelins can also hover in mid-air, and the Storm is able to maintain this the longest as part of its mechanics that amplifies its shield for damage mitigation. So minor management needed here, as it's a master of elemental AoE damage, but it can't have all the fun all the time. And that's just one example of javelin diversity. The Colossus is the heaviest and the slowest, but can pull out a shield to soak more damage than the rest. The Interceptor is the speediest and the most agile, suited to close quarters combat, while the Ranger is excellent for an all-rounded player, able to be offensive or defensive in a jack-of-all-trades role, with single target DPS in mind. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. We'll talk about combat shortly, so to wrap up the movement part of the gameplay, I'll say Anthem nailed that department because it feels fluid and fun once you get the hang of it, and you just want to keep on doing it, whatever the game mode, as long as there's movement and combat, which is a ton of fun and gets really addictive. Underwater movement can be a challenge, but give it a few tries and it will be alright. So let's talk about combat and how that works here. To start with, the basics are straightforward. Your javelins have shields and a health bar underneath, so watch out for your shield depleting, as that will expose your soft underbelly, but you can dodge to avoid attacks and kite a little for shield regeneration. If you or one of your squad mates die, you can revive them by hitting the F key up close, unless it's in a no revive zone, which most missions will have. Killing enemies also drops health restore pickups alongside ammo pickups, so look out for those. For combat abilities, you can equip your javelins loadout in the Forge with 2 weapons ranging from sniper rifles, assault rifles, LMGs, shotguns, pistols, and marksman rifles, each placed different, obviously, so play what's fun for you. Javelins also has 3 abilities, or gear as it's called here, and you can equip different choices of gear depending on your javelins. In some cases, you can pick from fire or ice skills for your Storm, while Rangers can pick grenades and missiles. There's some good variety to build your javelins with, and they're super fun to use in combat, so I do recommend experimenting with all the skills to know what's good and what feels right for you. Rounding that up are javelin components and inscriptions that offers passive boosts that are your quintessential RPG stats. You'll have armor increase, damage increase, or specific javelin upgrades for their individual skills, which by the way has some bugs at the moment that causes them to not trigger for high level folks. And finally, you can also equip one-time consumables that can increase much of what we've already talked about in the components section for one expedition on the launch panel. During combat itself, Anthem has a key mechanic that it does a real shitty job of explaining to new players, and that is the primers and detonator system, which I'll be calling primes and dets for short. Some javelin abilities are called primers, and they'll put status effects on enemies, which primes them up for a combo. Primers have this icon next to primer abilities. Detonators is the fun part, and dets are all about exploiting enemies that have already been primed for a combo, which results in massive DPS. Dets have this X icon next to det abilities. So for an example, I'll throw a frost grenade on an enemy to either put a frost effect and freeze them in place, and then I'll use use either of my dead abilities, which are the rocket launcher or melee attack, to blow it up for a combo. So why is this important, and should you even care? The answer is yes. Executing combos isn't only satisfying visually, it also gives you more XP through feats. And on harder difficulties, a well-organized group of players calling out primes and dats on targets can make easy work of even the toughest challenges, and that's why javelin synergies via combos are both important and a lot of fun to experiment with. To wrap up the combat, all javelins have a resource bar that builds up its ultimate ability, and oh boy, you definitely want to use those, as all of them are epic goodness that can turn a fight around in the most stylish of ways possible. Overall, gameplay and combat have been the best parts of Anthem for me so far, and it's hard to get sick of it after all the hours I've put into it so far, and if I do, I'll just swap over to my next javelin and have fun with that. The problem is, getting to the fun parts is in fact a challenge and hurdle, as there's so much downtime in Anthem between loading screens and back and forthing to Fort Tarsis before you get to play your javelins again. Let's now move on to the next important component that's a heated issue in Anthem currently, and that is with the content. What do you do and what can you do in Anthem? Anthem's PvE content comprises of main story missions, agent contracts, which are like side missions, strongholds, which are 4-player dungeons, and a free play mode that allows you to explore a large portion of the Anthem world with other players, where you can gather resources, explore location, hunt for collectibles, and take part in world events. The game begins with a brief tutorial expedition letting you into the story and gameplay basics before Fort Tarsis is unlocked to you as a hub. From here, you will get to access NPC dialogues, access the Forge, which is where you set up your javelin loadouts. You have access to the Vault, which is your bank, the Vanity Store, and of course the ability to launch expeditions. The first few hours are all about completing a series of main story missions, which in turn unlocks new things in Fort Tarsis. One example is acquiring agents, like Matthias Sumner, who represents the Arcanists faction, and down the line he'll offer you Arcanist contracts, which are repeatable side missions that awards reputation upon completion with the Arcanists, which will be important later on. The same applies to Bryn and the Sentinel contracts, and Yarrow for freelancer contracts. So when you're done with the main story missions, you should have 3 agents offering contracts, and they can sometimes put rare or legendary contracts on the board, which you don't want to miss. As for the contract missions themselves, the novelty of running them wears out real fast, as objectives are highly repetitive, and that's not just for contract missions, by the way. Most of the missions in-game follow a similar structure, in the form of flying to Objective A, gathering relics, holding a point until the relic is silent, and then taking down the big baddie that appears, then flying to Objective B to do something similar. After a few days, you'll start to see that there isn't much variety to complement Anthem's excellent gameplay and combat with these contract missions. As for strongholds, the game launches with 3, and the first one becomes available as you move the main story along, while the other 2 appears when you beat the game. Strongholds have no private mode, so it always requires a 4-player group to play, and it's pretty damn fun to run. The Tyrant Mine and the Temple of Scar offer some good side story that fleshes out the motives of the world's enemy factions, and are structured like dungeons, so you're probably used to these in other games already. You have multiple sections, objective-based, and plenty of challenging fights, including a final boss fight that does drop loot. Now, the third stronghold is literally a copy and paste of the final boss fight from the main story mission, which in my opinion is pretty lazy on BioWare's part, and while it may drop better loot, the fight mechanics are pretty much the same, so it does nothing if you wanted to see more of Anthem's group content and how it differs. And then there's free play mode, which is what the game derives as its open world content. Free play allows players to explore beyond the walls of Fort Tarsis, and I personally love this mode. There's plenty you can do here, either solo or just tagging around other players. You can gather resources for daily feats and challenges and reputation. You can explore and find collectibles like notes and other mysteries that opens up more of the backstory and the lore. You can also stumble upon world events, which are the scripted, multifaceted objectives that rewards you with a chest of loot at the end, or look for chests in other areas, or enter one of the many instance dungeons to find something valuable. Overall, there's quite a fair bit you can do in free play, and trust me, you will want to jump into this mode as often as possible, as one part of the main story progress is sort of gated behind a series of objectives that you must hit in free play mode, which I personally didn't like initially because it's an artificial downtime to make you stop and smell the roses, but I found it easy to complete and had done most of these objectives anyway, even before I reached that part of the mission. For other players, that may not necessarily be the case, so do yourselves a favor and jump into free play every now and then if you're just starting out. And finally, for content modes, there's quick play, in which you join to reinforce an already started mission with squads that aren't full, and doing so gives you more XP than usual per completion at the end screen. This is a handy mode to help you level up faster while helping others get through the content, and while it's a popular mode to farm levels quickly, new players be warned, you can actually get into the final story mission this way, so proceed with caution. During the early access, one thing I noticed about quick play was more often than not I was actually joining squads and missions that had already been bugged out, either with things not spawning or walls not coming down, so when players leave the squad, quick play thinks that particular squad needs reinforcing, so the matchmaking doesn't quite compute the difference until of course all mission bugs are squashed. So that leaves us with the end game. Once you hit level 30 and have picked up some sweet loot along the way, what can players expect? Disappointingly, not very much. Hitting level 30 unlocks the 3 highest difficulty modes, Grandmaster 1 to 3, and these will require very good gear alongside a high gear score and a coordinated squad, preferably using effective voice comms, javelin builds, and of course, proper distribution of primers and detonator abilities. Running any of the game modes in GM 1 to 3 means better chance at rare loot, but the problem is, endgame simply means running higher difficulties of recycled content. So yes, that's GM strongholds, GM free plays, contracts, and quick play, and this will probably be a buzzkill if you're hoping for post-level cap exclusive content. Furthermore, there are objectives in the form of challenges to complete, which requires massive time sinks in the available game modes once you've done the story, like completing 100 world events in free play, for example, alongside a few others to earn some paltry rewards. Anthem's endgame leaves a lot to be desired in the content department, but that doesn't mean you won't run it to start earning the best masterwork or legendary weapons, sigils, and gear for your javelins for all that future content that will be coming to the game. Let's now talk about progression. What are players working to accomplish in Anthem? We know it's a narrative-driven looter shooter, so let's start with the loot. Your javelins, as you already know, can equip weapons, gear abilities, and components that makes up your loadout. Each of these items comes in different rarities and gear score, so you'll start with white, which is common, green uncommon, blue for rare, epic purples, masterwork for gold, and legendary for yellow. The more you play and gain XP, the better your loot drops are, and the more your overall javelin gear score and rarity increases, as noted on the top right of your forge. Now, it is important to note that nothing in-game is currently locked behind gear score, but as a rule of thumb that's hinted by the game, you'll probably want a gear score of 350 or more before even thinking about tackling Grandmaster difficulties. The loot drops are completely RNG and can be dropped from enemies and bosses, chests, or crafted, and for natural world drops, the rarity I noticed comes somewhat progressively the closer you are to the next rank. So I started getting epic drops whilst halfway through being a rare javelin, and masterwork drops came pretty early on as an epic javelin. It's a pretty straightforward system, but does feel shallow every now and then, considering the loot tables for most of the game involves seeing the same named weapons every rarity until you hit masterwork, which should take a couple of days maximum. While masterwork and legendary weapons and gear feels like a refreshing change, the real grind begins to get the best passive stats and ability procs, which is where you'll be spending most of your time, especially if you get the drop you wanted early on but have to regrind the item at a higher gear score if you aren't at the gear score ceiling when you first got it. Drops aren't the only way to get better loot though. You can also craft them, and to do that you'll need blueprints, aka recipes. Now these are also somewhat time consuming. You can craft the basic common ones easily enough, but to access the rare and epic blueprints you'll have tasks to complete. Firstly, some like javelin components are gated behind reputation grinds with each of the 3 factions, the Arcanists, Sentinels, and Freelancers, and you increase their XP by running their contract missions or by doing activities out in free play. Once you hit the next rank, blueprints are automatically added to your forge. For weapon blueprints, you'll have tasks or challenges that you can track in the menus, and some require you to kill 10 elite enemies with that particular weapon in order to craft the rare version, and then kill 5 legendary enemies for the epic version, for example. So if you want the full arsenal of weapon blueprints for all your javelins, including masterwork weapons, be sure you're tracking these challenges. For javelin gear skills, most of them involve completing missions and world events while they are equipped in order to get the next rarity blueprints. It's a grind, but fairly easy to accomplish in my opinion, as you can simply roam around in easy mode of free play to get most of these done quickly. Besides loot and gear, other progression systems in Anthem are pretty linear. You have, of course, experience points for a pilot, and increasing levels here unlocks new features in-game, like being able to get more javelins, equip more gear slots, gain access to consumables, and things like that. Levels, for the most part, aren't as important here in Anthem because of the scaling system it uses. I can run missions as a level 10 with a level 30 player just fine, as the scaling affects each player individually, which is a cool system that doesn't ruin the fun for anyone, in the sense that, as a new player, you can play all the content with your high-level gear score buddies, although at lower difficulties, you'll start to notice that the higher gear score players will be one-shot killing everything in your missions, so that could detract the fun somewhat. So how does one get experience points? Unlike most games that awards XP per enemy kill and mission completion, Anthem uses an accumulative feature called feats. During any gameplay mode, you can earn feats in a variety of ways. For example, killing an enemy in melee awards you with the basic melee feat, worth 50 XP, and doing so more raises the feat to silver, worth 100 XP, and finally to gold, worth 150. There are many feats you can track in the menus during missions, ranging from ally revives to materials harvested, combos executed, and plenty more. And if you are proactively doing these things, you'll earn more XP at the mission completion screen. Additionally, playing with other players in public groups earns you more XP than solo play, so keep that in mind. For collectors and lore enthusiasts, the Cortex is the game's codex that BioWare often uses in its RPG games, and there's a ton of notes and memos and history bits and more that you can find and gather out in the world or in the fort itself. And finally, there's the daily, weekly, and monthly tasks that is pretty much self-explanatory, and it awards players with in-game currency and crafting materials upon completion. Now, I've briefly mentioned in-game currency, so it's time to talk about Anthem's cash store and economy. For starters, players can earn coin in-game mostly from completing challenges, and coin serves as the game's in-game currency that can be spent to purchase crafting materials and cash store vanity items, which is a big deal because it's a way to get the flashy stuff without spending any money. Should you run out of challenges to do and have no way to earn coin, fret not, as those daily, weekly, and monthly trials also rewards you with coin. And then there's the alliance system as well. Your alliance consists of players on your Origins friends list and anyone you've played with in-game recently. Every week, the XP they earn by playing Anthem can generate coin for you, which is a pretty interesting way to generate in-game income. As your alliance plays during the week, the XP they've earned counts towards your alliance tier, and at the end of the week, you receive your coin payout. Only your top 5 contributors count towards your tier, and friends get bonuses for their contributions extra even if you play missions with them. The premium currency is called shards, and these can only be purchased with real money, and you'll use it to unlock those vanity items like javelin customization pieces, animations, or decals if you don't want to use your hard-earned coins. Now, the in-game cash store itself is pretty barren at the moment, and new items are supposedly being added every week, so not much to say here. There's no loot boxes, which is surprising for EA standards, but one will no doubt question the existence of microtransactions at all in a $60 game, because I certainly do. So while letting players buy vanity items with in-game coins certainly reduces concern, it's still a valid point of contention. Alright, it's time to talk about the story, and this is an obligatory spoiler warning, even though I'm going to briefly point stuff out. Still, fair warning. If you don't want to know anything about the story, look at the pinned comment below for the timestamp to skip this part. Is Anthem's story any good? Players take on the role as a rookie freelancer at the beginning of the game who joins the mother of all missions to shut down the Heart of Rage, which is a cataclysm that emerged out of the wreckage of Freehold, a former kingdom that was ravaged by the enemy Dominion faction, who were after a Shaper relic that could manipulate the Anthem of Creation, which is a life source for creation in this world. Are you lost yet? Long story short, shit hits the fan and you barely make it out alive, and your story starts in Fort Tarsis in Bastion, one of the last enclaves for humanity. It's been 2 years since the event, and freelancers, your faction of militaristic heroes, are no longer respected or even trusted due to your group's failures to keep the people safe. And the main narrative in Anthem explores this, how you, the player, builds up the freelancer faction again alongside main characters and side characters in game via a series of main story missions and contracts. Of course, there must be conflict, so the Dominion are back again and are seeking a way to return to the Heart of Rage to harness the power there for whatever reason, so you, naturally, work towards heading back there yourself, and this time for redemption. That is the gist of the story. Now, for highlights in the main narrative, I thought the writing was decent in the beginning, and kudos to BioWare for getting the character animations, voice acting, and dialogue right. I really like the dialogue and speech patterns for your interactions with a lot of these characters, as they do feel like real-world interactions that one would have in such situations, and it doesn't insult the player intelligence. I found that pretty refreshing. In typical BioWare fashion, you have plenty of unique characters, with a standout being that of your Cypher, Owen, who gave me flashbacks of a mixture of Alistair, Anders, and Sarah from the Dragon Age franchise, and his story arc and development was probably my favorite part of the main story, which results in a cliffhanger for probably a future update. As for the main story's ending, that's probably the worst part, because it ended with a whimper rather than a bang, and I know they're setting up future DLCs, but that's no excuse. It, again, really reminded me of Dragon Age Inquisition, another BioWare game, and in that game's ending, there was a disappointing story ending with Corypheus, and Solus going missing until 2 DLCs later, so it's BioWare being BioWare here. And I don't know if that's a good thing, but there are some solid moments in Anthem's narrative for sure. As for story length, it took me roughly 15 to 20 hours tops to complete the game playing casually. And yes, that includes spending a few hours in free play mode for the Tome Challenge, which is a mandatory roadblock that needs you to do a bunch of tasks like complete world events and collect chests in free play before you can progress the main story. Speaking of which, I've seen a lot of backlash for this part, and I do understand it. I myself would feel the same had I not already gotten most of it done by simply eagerly jumping into free play extensively to explore everything that I would usually do for my reviews. I guess it's a good thing that main story missions are not gated behind level locks, because that would come off as way worse in my opinion, so yeah, pick your poison here. In summary of Anthem's story, it's short, there's a decent build up, weak ending, good execution though via characters, visuals, and dialogue, and of course it all points to future content, which is the trend these days, but hey, at least we're getting them for free. Let's now talk about community and social aspects, which I usually do for my MMO reviews, but Anthem is of course a special case because it's more of an online 4-player co-op experience that BioWare doesn't necessarily have experience with, and that really shows. Just to be clear, you can play most of the game solo in private mode if you wish to. Just know that you'll be gimped by not getting more XP than players who play publicly with others, alongside being able to tackle harder difficulties and strongholds and even enter free play. So it's a forced system to get you to play with others, which is fair enough, but are there adequate tools in place to facilitate group play? The answer is no, I'm afraid, not right now. My main criticism of playing in groups of randoms during public missions or strongholds is the tethering checkpoint system, whereby if you load into missions slower than anybody else or the fastest guy, and they're already speeding ahead to the mission location, you will then be put into another loading screen which teleports you to where the group is currently at. This is done to make sure that there are no AFKers, but for a large majority of players that run Anthem on an HDD or an external hard drive, this is a pain in the ass. You already know that the game has loading screen time issues, so being put into a loading screen one after the other because of this system deflates the entire experience, and within the first few hours I said fuck it and I moved my game to my SSD, which took care of that problem. But oh no, I'm not done yet. Anthem has a voice chat that nobody ever uses effectively in all my missions and playtime, and this makes completing certain objectives with mechanics a chore. And the logical thing to do would be to have an in-game basic chat system with text messages, or hell, even take the ping system from Apex Legends, which would be a huge upgrade here in Anthem. So that's on BioWare to fix. Otherwise, playing with randoms can be a mixed bag of experiences. I've had good times, I've had bad times with griefers just goofing around strongholds with no option to vote to kick a player, which is something I believe the game also needs as well. Of course, if you're playing Anthem with friends, your gaming group, or your guild, then this is probably a non-issue. Anthem is a gorgeous game, let's be clear about that. The design and aesthetic of the world's environments and map biomes, javelins, and yes, even the character models and soundtracks are all plus points. Part of this game is a visually immersive experience that transports you into this world BioWare's created, but other parts of it just comes crashing down hard as its early access optimization just isn't good enough, which often leads to frustration after some time. Where the game really shines in this department is hands down the javelin customization options, and rightly so, because javelins are the main attraction of Anthem, and that equates to the fun parts of the game, which are the gameplay and combat and getting to watch your javelin in action. So what can accentuate that experience? It's being able to customize the look and feel of your javelin suits thoroughly, and I love the amount of colors, textures, and fabrics and materials and other good stuff that's available for you to play with. One could spend a lot of time in the forge just creating and coming up with the perfect look for their javelins in game. Having said that, other aspects of javelin customization is woefully bad, like in the weapons department. All weapon categories look bland, indifferent, and uninspiring even when you unlock the epic, masterwork, or legendary version, as they're still the same skins for the most part, just with shinier colors, better stats, and a fancy name, which doesn't really feel all that rewarding. This can be improved with custom skins from the store that can be bought with coins in the future perhaps, but right out of the gates, the best weapons should look and feel way better than default lobby ones considering the time you put in to get them, but at this stage it just doesn't look or feel great. Other areas that could use severe improvements is definitely the UI, as menus are still a pain to navigate, and hiding key information behind several menus makes it a pain to bring up every now and then, and some notifications in-game actually pop up and block the flight heat meter, which can get really annoying. It's always an exciting time when BioWare announces a new IP, because that means there's a new world and lore and stories to immerse ourselves in. So does Anthem deliver? For the most part, yes. The backstory is one of mystery, and it's contemporary fantasy with human factions in the world, futuristic technology blending in with mythology and elemental stuff, mixed in with creatures like the Scar and others, and they are interesting enough for me to want to find out more. And Anthem lets you do so through its collectibles and core tax system that lets you pour into all these history and events and people of interest, and that's really satisfying for me, and I know I'm probably in the minority of players that likes to hunt lore. It may not have the scope and depth we've come to expect in comparison to, say, the world of Thedas and its rich history and races, but let's not forget this game is a week old and is laying the foundation for more lore and stories to be told, and with the characters I've seen so far, I'm okay with that. If you've played through the main story missions or interacted with NPCs in Fort Tarsis, there's so much going on in far-off places, with name drops like Anthem and Heliost and Stralheim, which could be maps or future hubs and regions that we could visit in the future, paving the way for new biomes or different javelin types based on these new cultures, vanity items, and even factions to encounter. That's a tease for the future for sure. Elsewhere, the NPC interactions in this game are pretty cool too, as you'll get a chance to decide certain outcomes or influence someone's life decisions, and that could be reflected in your surroundings at Fort Tarsis. Encouraging a merchant to start a business venture, for example, sees more marketplace activity in the Enclave, giving it life, and watching the fort change over time is a nice touch, loading screens be damned. In other areas, merchant vendors don't just stand around there and sell stuff, they talk to you, share their stories, and each time you leave and come back, their stories grow just as yours does. It's an interesting take on a living narrative world that I praise but also criticize because there's just not enough of it, or enough choices and consequences that actually matters in the long run, which is something I expect of a BioWare game, shooter genre or not. I had no idea what to call this section, so the little things it is. BioWare has a Jekyll and Hyde syndrome when it comes to making games. Parts of it will be pretty damn awesome, and other parts will leave you wondering how on earth did it pass quality control. Much of what I'm alluding to here involves simple bugs like enemies not spawning or walls not coming down to proceed to the next objective area and missions. In free play mode, after hours of loot and world boss farming, sometimes you'll get a notification that the server's coming down, and sometimes you just disconnect and get booted to the main menu again. And yeah, your heart might stop thinking, oh my god, I've lost all that loot in progress. But you can simply rejoin the same free play session and all your stuff will be there in your inventory. Minor annoyances aside, there's some real tangible stuff to talk about too. Like for min-maxers, the in-game UI doesn't have a character stat screen, so it's a bummer and really difficult to wonder where your builds are at when it comes to the numbers, and that's pretty big for RPG, right? And something as simple as adding the feature to read Cortex entries during loading screens, like what Dragon Age Inquisition does for its loading screens, that is something so simple and trivial that's also being overlooked. So yeah, the simple things in BioWare could have had a lot more attention put into it for quick and easy fixes. Additionally, so many of these issues were talked about in the demos, and yet there's always a slow turnaround or an excuse, but at least they're responding to feedback on Twitter, and I'm sure the upcoming stream will announce the day one patch for most of these things down the line. Now, the not so little thing and the elephant in the room for most players is the no PvP stance for Anthem. I've seen both sides of the argument. The 4 PvP folks have a point. More players will play Anthem if there's optional PvP modes and competitive leaderboards for PvP, while the non-PvP people also have a point in that PvP will cause balance issues, resulting in more time and effort being spent on PvP, which could kill or hamper development on the PvE, which means less content or quality overall for the game modes moving forward. Look, I've got nothing to add. I do agree with both sides here, so what do you think? We have now arrived at the tail end of the review, folks. So if you've been watching up until this point, thank you very much for sticking with me. Let's wrap this up. So, it's time to share some final thoughts about Anthem and if it's worth playing. Overall, for an original new IP, world, and characters, Anthem does have some good going for it, and there's a real fun factor if you're taking your time through the game and haven't encountered any of these issues highlighted by everyone, which is pretty highly unlikely for those of you that's played early access. For those that are about to jump in for the global launch, as mentioned many times, there's going to be a day one patch that's going to address a lot of the issues I've talked about, so that's nice for you guys. As for the end game and grinding, I've kind of given up on the grind, and I can tell you there's just not enough substance there to keep me repeating content for a chance at better gear with the RNG on the stats and all of that, and that is coming from someone who plays MMORPGs for a living. I'm used to the grind, but MMORPGs usually gives you shinies to get with new content that becomes available once you're part of the endgame crowd, and Anthem just doesn't. And since I can do all I want to on normal or hard difficulties, there really isn't a motivation there for me. But as a narrative-driven, expanding world, oh, I'll definitely keep coming back to see how this IP and the world and the story develops, because for all its crappy issues and bugs, those things can be fixed in the coming months, and the gameplay and combat is still and will be my favorite things to do in Anthem. So having said that, play or avoid. If you are already an Origin Premier subscriber for whatever reason and Anthem is just sitting there in your library, I'd say, yeah, give it a shot. At $15 a month, you can blow through the entire game and then some, so that's pretty good value for money right there. If you are a BioWare fan and like their brand of narrative-driven RPG games, Anthem is probably worth a look, but I personally don't think it's even close to Dragon Age or Mass Effect standards, but that's being a little unfair because those two franchises has had many years to develop its world and characters, and they launched with a mostly finished game unlike this one, which says a lot about where we are in the state of gaming right now. Anyway, if you're curious about it all, you'll probably get some enjoyment out of this. For looter-shooter grinders, Anthem is probably best avoided for the next few months until most of its grouping issues and optimization gets sorted, alongside more content being added overall to give you the best bang for your buck. Or you'll probably burn out way too quickly and easily. So that's my thoughts. It's your turn now. For those who have played Anthem in the early access, what is your advice to new players? Play it or avoid it? Let me know in the comments section below. Hit that like button for the love of hot showers, and feel free to subscribe to the channel for more MMO videos and get notified on all my latest uploads. Once again, I'm Adrian, and I thank you for watching. Hey folks, thanks so much for watching that video. If you guys want to watch more, you can click the subscribe button at the bottom there or somewhere over here. And don't forget to hit that bell to get notified on all my latest videos. So I'll see you guys at the next vid. Take care.